Joe's Inner Child Podcast.
When you directed Christian, the actor who plays Gus, did you explain to him when his ears would be moving so that he could convey emotions around that, or did you build the ear movements in post to match his expressions?
No, great question. It was all on set. You know, we augmented a couple things here and there afterwards. But it was all on set, and it started as a puppeteer who sort of watched Christian and reacted to him. We talked about him like they were like eyebrows in like a Disney or Pixar character. Like that's where all the expression comes from, you know? So that was what motivated us to start. As we went along and got really good at it, you know, Christian sometimes could take cues, so he could hear the motor go, which I find is amazing that he's giving that performance while that's happening. But sometimes you could literally say, like, when you hear that right ear go, that's when you turn your head and react to something. And, you know, you just start to find ways to sort of play off of each other. But it's all Christian, and the puppeteer is really taking his lead.
Did you use any post-apocalyptic media to help provide your directorial approach?
Yes, but mostly to throw it out, really. Mostly to sort of say, like, this is sort of like what we're used to when we think of these things, you know, and step back and go, like, what would some of this stuff actually look like, you know? And that really became the fun of it, was like, this is what we're used to. What would it really look like? Or this is what we're used to. What would it look like if we took a different approach or the opposite approach? You know, like in episode 2, like, what if the first people they run into are like not cannibals? You know, what if it's actually like a really cool just family that's just, you know, like the Griswolds and like vacation, you know? It's like that became a fun way to look at the end of the world.
I love that. And to move on, Beth, I wanted to ask you about if there was anything from the comic when you were researching the comic story beats, any story beats that you had trouble translating to the script for Netflix because it was a different medium?
I don't think so. I feel like we use the inspiration from the comic book, and obviously the tone is different, but we were heavily inspired by all the characters that Jeff created, as well as the magical element and the imagination that he uses through Gus's dream sequences that we tried to bring to the screen, and a lot of other elements. I don't think there was anything that we felt like, you know, we can't do this on screen. We just, you know, brought some characters in earlier. We moved around some things to make it feel more organic to our story. But no, we heavily are inspired by the comic book.
Obviously, you did a lot of writing that was involved many different kinds of animals. So I was curious about your research process into animals and how deep you delved into those when writing this.
Well, I happen to own my own small little adorable dog who got to go to the writer's room to meet Jim's adorable dogs when we had an actual writer's room and we weren't on the Zoom room. But we had a group of writers that helped in terms of researching different emotions, and possibly we looked at different hybrids in terms of that's what their superpowers were. And, you know, for instance, Gus's super hearing and sense of smell. And that's how we adapted that in terms of what could their animal instincts bring to their characters that people can't do. So.
That's
also
awesome.
The Downeys helped because they have a small petting zoo at their property.
They have a lot of animals.
There were some animals where they were quick to point out, like, no, actually the difference between an alpaca and a llama, because we know we have both.
Since you brought that up, did you spend a lot of time at the zoo to help decide how you wanted to direct the animals on screen?
We did, yeah, because I hadn't been to the zoo in a very long time. And then obviously one of the first, when you go to New Zealand, because they didn't have COVID the way that we did, you could actually do things like go to the zoo. And it was like actually one of the first things that we did when we landed there. So it was like, you know, however many months of being here and not leaving the house, and then suddenly going to a zoo in Auckland or an amusement park or something. But yeah, I was kind of struck by, I hadn't been to a zoo in a long time. And I was struck by like how much you forget about being a kid and like seeing those animals. And yeah, part of it sucks because they're cooped up, but there's also something about being that close to some things that are really mind-blowing. But it kind of helped us all sort of stay in the world of nature and love of nature. And
I love that. Now, Jeff, I want to focus on you for just a sec. Did you, when you were initially writing the story over a decade ago, did you have in mind that it could be a feature to the point where you kind of created certain things in the comic book that could translate well on screen? Or were you specifically focused on the comic book medium when you were initially telling the story?
Yeah, definitely the latter. I never really, even to this day when I do comics, I don't think about an adaptation. I'm always trying to use the medium I'm working in to its fullest. So for comics, I'm really focused on the day-to-day of trying to make a great comic. And I did things in the comic that aren't, they're not exactly easy to adapt or translate. So I think for years it was challenging for anyone to try to find a way into it adaptation wise until Jim came along. But yes, no, I didn't. I didn't have film or TV or any of that stuff in my head at all.
Did you, when you were initially creating the characters, since it wasn't something you were envisioning for TV and just something you were envisioning in the comic book, did you use any people in your real life to inspire the arcs for the characters in the book?
No, not really. I think that most of these characters came from more of a fictional place. Like there was not a lot of autobiography in it. I think the closest to that would be the fact that I named the character Gus after my own newborn at the time, Gus, which ironically now he's the same age as Gus in the book, and we're in a pandemic, so that's kind of weird. But yeah, no, but yeah. Otherwise, I wasn't really drawing from real life too much with this one. I was really drawing from more of a tradition of these great post-apocalyptic stories, like things like The Stand and Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and all sort of the staples, but then trying to bring my own voice to them and my own story and kind of put a twist on it.
I like that. So Beth, to swing back to you, I know that you guys started adapting this for Netflix in 2016. So, and I also read that it wasn't initially, nobody knew at the time about how big this COVID and the current pandemic has gotten. Did you have to change the way you were going to approach certain things because of how the actual real world changed with it? Or do you feel like that helped lent it so that it was easier for it to be translated onto screen?
Yeah, so Jim actually started developing it in 2016 with the Downeys, and I joined in 2019 after the pilot had already been shot. So but still pre-COVID. And we had when I joined the project, we had broken the entire season and written a few of the episodes before the pandemic had hit. And so we really didn't change too much. If anything, it gave us a shorthand with the audience where we didn't have to convince them too much about this really happening and in terms of making it grounded. And we obviously, the biggest change was production. We had to move our production dates later, and we had to change certain scenes to use less extras. And in one of our episodes that was that the setting is on a train, we were originally going to have a passenger train with a ton of people inside, which quickly got turned to oh my God, I'm blanking. With cargo, sorry. With cargo instead of people. And so that was probably the largest change in terms of, it was more production and not really story-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Did you look at any specific landscapes, like forest-wise, or based, how the episodes go? No spoilers, the way that the different landscapes look. Did you look at any actual real-life places to study them when you were deciding how to direct it?
Yeah, because I think, the comic book is Nebraska originally. It's like the nature preserve in Nebraska. And I think when we got to New Zealand and started shooting there, it's like everything there is amazing. Everything there is amazing, and it's quickly became like, I don't know if anyone's ever going to believe this is Nebraska. So we brought the Yellowstone into it more just because we didn't want to say like, oh my God, there's these amazing mountains that are worthy of Lord of the Rings. We're going to point the camera the other way to get the sort of flat landscape of Nebraska. So a little bit was kind of looking into the Rocky Mountains and that neck of the woods and what we could actually pull off with New Zealand locations. And very quickly you find that what's beautiful there is it's kind of a fairy tale version of America. All the trees are always like, there's a curve to them. There's a way that things are always a little bit bigger, a little bit more, I hate to say childlike, but there's a magic to that area that we luckily were able to take advantage of for our story.
Because you specifically mentioned that when you looked at other post-apocalyptic stories, you chose things that you wanted to leave out. Is there anything you'd like to say to people who might have a stigma against post-apocalyptic stories to get them to, give Sweet Tooth another look and just look past the post-apocalyptic aspect? Yeah.
Well, I think like the pandemic, like we only use that element as a sort of jumping off point, like really the heart, soul, and everything of our show is Gus and his relationship with Jeopard and these characters. And those are characters that I think we proudly, we're the only show that have these people. And that was what was fun, is like, we were always looking and going like, what's a scene that can only exist in Sweet Tooth? What's a character that can only exist in Sweet Tooth, which is, it's rare that you get to have that luxury. So, elements like the pandemic and the end of the world are all things that help us serve that, but that is definitely not the thrust of our series.
Literary Joe's Inner Child Podcast.